My sister revealed her wedding date at my engagement party. I told her fiancé she wasn't the bride. When the officiant asked if anyone objected to my sister's wedding, I stood up in front of 200 people and said the words that ended everything. Nobody in that room knew what I'd been carrying for 3 months. Nobody knew I had a manila folder in my bag with photographs that would burn her whole life down. I'd rehearsed 100 different ways to stay quiet. In the end, my mouth moved before my fear could stop it, and I watched my sister's face go the color of drywall. My name is Dahlia, and 6 months before that wedding, I was the one getting engaged. Theo proposed on the pier where we'd had our first date, down on one knee with the ring his grandmother had worn for 51 years, and I said yes before he even finished the sentence. We threw an engagement party 2 weeks later in my parents' backyard, string lights strung between the oaks, a caterer my mother had saved for a year to afford. It was supposed to be my night. I'd waited 29 years to feel like the center of something good. My younger sister Willa had always been the brighter light in every room she entered, and I'd made peace with that a long time ago. She was gorgeous in the effortless way that made strangers stop mid-sentence, and she dated a rotating cast of men who treated her like a trophy they were terrified of losing. 6 months before my party, she'd started seeing Owen Bradshaw, a soft-spoken hotel developer 12 years older than her, quiet in a way that felt like money that didn't need to announce itself. Our family adored him instantly. My mother started calling him the good one within a month. The night of my engagement party, Willa arrived 40 minutes late in a white dress that was, unmistakably, not a color you wear to someone else's celebration. Owen trailed behind her carrying a bottle of champagne he hadn't been asked to bring. She hugged me too hard and too long, the kind of hug that's really a performance for an audience. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself she was just excited for me. That was the first lie I let myself believe that night, and it wouldn't be the last. Theo was in the middle of a toast, glass raised, thanking my parents for raising the woman he loved, when Willa's laugh cut across the yard like a struck match. She wasn't being loud on purpose, I told myself. She just laughed loud. Except heads turned, the way they always turned for her, and Theo's toast lost its rhythm for a second before he found his footing again. I squeezed his hand under the table and made myself smile. It was a small thing. It shouldn't have mattered. About an hour in, while I was still working the room thanking guests for coming, Owen stood up near the dessert table and cleared his throat loud enough to silence 3 separate conversations. "Sorry to interrupt," he said, grinning the specific grin of a man who has no idea he's about to detonate something. But Willa and I couldn't wait, and I don't think tonight could get any better anyway. My stomach dropped before he even said it. Willa rose beside him, glowing, one hand pressed to her collarbone like she was about to sing. "We picked our date," Owen announced. "The 17th of next June. We wanted our favorite people to hear it first, together, tonight." The yard erupted the way it had erupted for Charlie Rose at another party in another story I'd never heard, but the effect was identical. A tidal wave of joy that swept every single guest away from me and toward the two of them in under a minute. My father was already crossing the lawn to shake Owen's hand. My mother had both palms pressed to her mouth, tears standing in her eyes. I stood there holding a half-empty glass of champagne like a stranger at my own party. "Can this wait?" I said, and the words came out sharper than I intended, sharp enough that the whole yard turned back to look at me instead. "This is my engagement party. Can you two announce your wedding date literally any other night?" The silence that followed had teeth in it. My mother's face slid from joy into something colder, faster than I'd ever seen it move. Willa's eyes filled instantly, right on cue, the way a sprinkler system trips the second it senses heat. "Oh my God, Dahlia, I'm so sorry," she said, her voice already wobbling in that theatrical way she'd perfected since childhood. "We just got so excited. I thought since we're both about to get married, we could share this moment together." I told her it wasn't a competition, that this was supposed to be my one night, and my mother cut in with a warning edge in her voice telling me not to make a scene, that Willa was just happy and I was ruining it. Not one person in that yard took my side. Not Theo's parents, not my own father, not even my best friend Priya, who only managed a small sympathetic glance from across the lawn before looking away. I let it go for the rest of the night because there was nothing else to do. I smiled through the remaining toasts, thanked people for their gifts, and watched my engagement quietly rebrand itself as a double celebration for the Bradshaw wedding. When Willa left, she hugged me at the gate and whispered that she loved me and never meant to steal my thunder, and then she was gone before I could answer, without helping fold a single chair. That night, lying in bed, Theo asked if I was okay, and I told him I was fine, even though something small and cold had already started forming in my chest, a suspicion I couldn't yet name. The family group chat lit up before midnight with photos of Willa and Owen, captioned by my aunt as the sweetest surprise of the year. My mother wrote that she hoped I hadn't been too hard on Willa, that pregnancy hormones weren't the only thing that made women emotional, and Willa had so much on her plate. Nobody mentioned that it was my party. Nobody mentioned that she hadn't been invited to be the center of it. Theo read the messages over my shoulder and went very quiet, the kind of quiet that told me he was doing math in his head that he didn't like the answer to. That was deliberate, he finally said. She waited until the toast was finishing. She had Owen do the announcement instead of doing it herself, so if anyone pushed back, it would look like they were attacking him, not her. That's not spontaneous excitement, Dahlia. That's staged. I wanted to defend her, the way I always had, but I couldn't find the words. Something about the timing had felt too clean, too rehearsed, like watching an actor hit her mark. 3 weeks later, my parents hosted a family dinner, and Willa arrived glowing on Owen's arm, showing off the sapphire ring he'd finally had properly sized. She hugged me at the door and told me she'd been so worried about us that she hated the idea of anything coming between sisters, especially now. I told her we were fine, and I meant to believe it. I watched her all through dinner instead, the way you watch a door you're not sure is locked. Her phone stayed face down in her lap the entire meal, and every few minutes her eyes dropped to it, thumbs moving fast, a small private smile crossing her face before she slid back into the conversation like nothing had happened. When my father asked about the venue for the wedding, Willa answered too quickly, listing a hotel in another city that Owen owned a stake in, and then changed the subject before anyone could ask a follow-up question. When my mother asked if they'd set a date for the engagement photos, Willa said she needed to check with her people, a phrase that made Owen laugh but made my skin prickle. Twice during dinner, her phone buzzed and she excused herself to take the call outside, taking her purse with her both times, which struck me as strange for a woman who was supposedly just stepping onto the patio for air. The second time she disappeared, I waited 2 minutes and then told everyone I was going to check on her. I walked through the kitchen toward the back door and stopped when I heard her voice through the cracked window, low and businesslike in a tone I had never once heard her use with Owen. "I know," she was saying. "I know it's risky, but it's almost over. Once the prenup is signed and the account is joint, none of this matters anymore." A pause. "He trusts me completely. He has no idea Marcus is even in the picture." My hands went cold around the dish towel I was still holding. Marcus. I had never heard that name in my life. I slipped back into the dining room before she caught me and sat through the rest of dinner smiling and nodding while my mind raced through everything I'd just heard. A joint account. A prenup she was pushing to finalize fast. A man named Marcus who Owen apparently knew nothing about. None of it sounded like a woman planning a wedding out of love. It sounded like a woman closing a deal before the other party could read the fine print. That night I told Theo everything. The strange phone calls, the rushed prenup talk, the name Marcus, and he was quiet for a long time before he said what I already feared. If there's another man involved and she's racing to finalize the finances before the wedding, that's not romance, Dahlia. That's a plan. I couldn't accuse her on the strength of one overheard sentence. She was too skilled at flipping a room, too practiced at turning tears into ammunition, and I had already watched her do it once at my own party in front of everyone I loved. If I went to Owen with nothing but a fragment of a phone call, she would cry, call me jealous, and have the whole family believing I was trying to sabotage her happiness out of spite. I needed something undeniable, something with a name and a face attached to it, something she couldn't cry her way out of. I hired a private investigator named Renata Ashworth, a former fraud detective with 11 years on the financial crimes unit before she went independent, recommended to me by a coworker who'd used her during a messy divorce. Renata listened to everything I had, the prenup comment, the name Marcus, the secretive calls, and told me it sounded less like an affair and more like something structured. Women planning affairs don't usually talk about joint accounts and prenups in the same breath, she said. That's the language of someone managing an asset, not a relationship. She agreed to watch Willa for 2 weeks and report back only what she could document. 10 days later, Renata called and asked me to come to her office. She slid a folder across the desk, the kind with a tab labeled in neat block letters, and told me to look at it slowly. Inside were surveillance photographs, time-stamped and dated, showing Willa meeting a man at a coffee shop twice a week, always the same booth in the back corner, always leaving separately. In 3 of the photos, they were holding hands under the table. In one, he leaned across to kiss her cheek, and she didn't pull away. His name, according to Renata's research, was Marcus Voss, and he had a record. He's been arrested twice for fraud, Renata said, tapping the folder. Once for running a fake investment scheme in another state, once for what the report calls romance-adjacent financial exploitation, which is a polite way of saying he's done this before. He finds someone with money, gets a partner close to them, and drains the account slowly enough that it looks like normal spending. Your sister isn't just seeing another man, Dahlia. I think she's running a con with him, and Owen is the mark. I felt sick reading it. The same nauseated lurch I imagine you feel right before you're proven right about the worst possible thing. Renata had pulled financial records too, the kind she was careful to explain she'd obtained legally through public filings and a source at the title company, showing that Willa had already opened a joint account with Owen 2 months before the engagement party, an account currently sitting at just under $200,000, money Owen believed was being saved for their future home. 3 separate withdrawals over the past 6 weeks had been wired to an account under Marcus Voss's name, disguised in the memo line as wedding vendor deposit. There's more, Renata said, and her voice had gone careful in the way professionals get right before they deliver the part that changes everything. I ran a deeper background check once the fraud pattern showed up. Your sister and Marcus Voss are already married. Quietly, 8 months ago, in a courthouse 2 counties over. There's a certificate on file, which means if she marries Owen Bradshaw next June while still legally married to another man, that's not just fraud. That's bigamy, and depending on how the money moves, it's likely wire fraud as well. I sat in that office and stared at a certified copy of a marriage license with my sister's real name on it, dated 8 months before she'd let our entire family believe she'd fallen in love for the first time. I called Theo from the parking lot and could barely get the sentence out. He drove straight to meet me, and I watched his face change as he read through the folder page by page, the same slow-motion collapse I'd felt in Renata's office. She's already married, he said finally, like the words needed to be spoken out loud to become real. She's already married to a con man, and she's about to marry Owen for his money, while our whole family throws her a second wedding. Dahlia, this is felony territory. This isn't a family fight anymore. I knew he was right, and I also knew the second I said any of it out loud to my family, Willa would twist it into me being the villain again, the jealous sister who couldn't stand her happiness, the same story she'd already primed everyone to believe. I needed to hear it from her mouth before I brought it to anyone else. Needed her cornered somewhere she couldn't perform her way out of it. I texted her that I was coming over and needed to talk, and she wrote back instantly asking if everything was okay, the same reflexive concern she'd shown me my whole childhood right before she did something that wasn't okay at all. When I arrived, Owen's car wasn't in the driveway, and I let myself feel a small, cold relief that I wouldn't have to do this in front of him yet. She opened the door already anxious, asking what was wrong. Was it me? Was it the wedding? And I walked past her into the living room where a framed engagement photo of her and Owen sat on the mantel beside a stack of bridal magazines with sticky notes marking dresses. I pulled out my phone, opened the folder of scanned documents Renata had given me, and held the screen up so she could see the marriage certificate first. The color left her face in a single visible wave, like watching a light switch flip somewhere behind her eyes. "Who is Marcus Voss?" I said, and my voice didn't shake the way I expected it to. Her mouth opened and closed twice before anything came out. "You had him followed," she whispered. "I hired an investigator," I said. "I have the marriage certificate, the coffee shop photos, the wire transfers to his account labeled as wedding vendor deposits. I know you've been married to him for 8 months. I know you're about to marry Owen while you're still legally his wife. Explain it to me, Willa, because right now none of this looks like anything but a con." She sank onto the arm of the couch, and for a moment the performance dropped entirely, replaced by something rawer and more frightened than I'd ever seen on her face. "Marcus and I got married before I even met Owen," she said, the words tumbling out fast now that the dam had broken. "It was supposed to be temporary, just paperwork, a way to protect some money he was moving after a lawsuit. Then I met Owen, and everything with Marcus was already done in my head, except we never actually filed for divorce, because Marcus said it would look suspicious if it happened right before I got engaged to someone with real money. He said we'd finalize it quietly after the wedding, split what we'd built together, and I'd be free. I asked her what exactly they'd built together, and she wouldn't meet my eyes when she answered. "A percentage," she said, "of whatever comes out of the joint account before the wedding. It's not what it sounds like, Dahlia." "It sounds exactly like what it is," I said. "You're defrauding a man who thinks he's marrying you out of love, and you're doing it with your actual husband's help. And you were going to let our entire family stand there next June and watch you commit a felony in a white dress." She started crying then, the real kind, not the practiced sprinkler system tears from the engagement party, and begged me to understand that she'd never meant for it to go this far, that Marcus had promised it would be simple, that she loved Owen now, that things had changed even if they hadn't started that way. I asked her the only question that mattered. "Were you ever going to tell him the truth?" She didn't answer for a long time, and when she finally did, her voice had gone hollow. After the wedding, she said. Once things were legally tied together, once he loved me too much to walk away over paperwork, I was going to quietly divorce Marcus and it would just look like an old mistake I'd cleaned up. Owen never had to know how it started. I told her that wasn't a plan to protect him. It was a plan to make sure he could never leave once he found out. And something in her face told me she already knew that, and simply hadn't let herself look at it directly until I said it out loud. Her fear curdled fast into something colder, the same flip I imagine every person who's ever cornered a con artist has seen. She stood up and told me if I said one word to Owen or to our parents, she would tell everyone I'd hired someone to stalk her out of jealousy, that I'd never gotten over not being the pretty one, that I was trying to destroy her happiness because Theo's proposal had made me feel threatened by hers. She said she'd make sure our mother never spoke to me again, that she'd paint me as unstable in front of the entire family the way she'd already started at my own engagement party. I told her I had documentation, timestamps, a marriage certificate with her real signature on it, and that no performance in the world was going to undo those. I drove home shaking and called Renata first, who told me calmly that given the scale of the fraud and the bigamy, this had moved past a family matter and into something the district attorney's financial crimes unit would want to know about regardless of what I decided to tell Owen personally. She connected me the next morning with a detective named Priya Okonkwo Hart, 19 years with the department, the last 6 specifically in financial crimes, who reviewed Renata's file and confirmed within the hour that they already had 2 prior complaints against Marcus Voss under a different alias, and that my sister's documentation would likely be the piece that finally let them build a real case. You did the right thing bringing this forward, Detective Okonkwo Hart told me. This is exactly the kind of paper trail that turns a suspicion into a conviction. I still hadn't told Owen anything, and every day that passed felt like a stone in my stomach, because somewhere in that house he was picking out cufflinks and reading wedding blogs, still believing he'd found the love of his life. Theo and I decided together that Owen deserved to hear it from us before it came from a detective's phone call, or, worse, from Willa spinning it first. We drove to his office on a Thursday afternoon, and I brought the folder, the same one that had already broken my sister open on her own couch. Owen listened without interrupting, the way people listen when a part of them already suspected something was wrong and has been waiting for permission to admit it. When I got to the part about the joint account and the wire transfers labeled as wedding vendor deposits, his jaw tightened in a way that told me he was doing the math on exactly how much money had already moved. When I showed him the marriage certificate, he went very still, staring at it long enough that I thought he might not say anything at all. She's already married, he finally said, to a man with a fraud record, and she's been taking money out of our account and sending it to him. I told him yes, and that a detective already had an open file, and that whatever he decided to do next, he deserved to walk into it with his eyes open instead of blind. He froze every joint account that afternoon and called his own attorney before he'd even finished reading the last page of the folder. 2 days later, detectives executed a warrant at Marcus Voss's apartment and found records connecting him to at least 4 other targeted relationships across 2 states, each one following the same pattern of a quiet marriage used to legally shield assets pulled from a wealthier partner who had no idea a husband existed at all. Willa was charged alongside him, bigamy and conspiracy to commit wire fraud among the counts, and the story made the local paper within the week, complete with her engagement photo from Owen's mantle used as the accompanying image. My mother called me sobbing, not in sympathy for what I'd uncovered, but in disbelief that any of it could be true, and it took 3 separate conversations before she stopped defending Willa long enough to actually look at the documents I sent her. My father didn't speak to me for 2 weeks, not out of anger exactly, but out of the particular silence of a man trying to figure out how he'd missed something that big in his own house. Owen filed for the marriage to be declared void before it ever legally happened, and testified against both Willa and Marcus when the case eventually reached a plea agreement, sparing everyone a trial but not the consequences. Willa pleaded guilty to a reduced charge and received 18 months, most of it suspended, along with a restitution order to repay what remained of Owen's drained account. Marcus received considerably longer, given his prior record and the pattern across multiple states, and the detective told me privately that my documentation had been the strongest piece of evidence in the entire case. Theo and I got married the following spring, in the same backyard where my engagement had first been hijacked, and this time the only announcement made that night was ours. Willa reached out once, months into her sentence, a letter I still haven't decided whether to answer. She wrote that she never meant for any of it to hurt me, that Marcus had made promises he never intended to keep, that she'd been drowning long before I ever hired anyone to follow her. I believe some of it, I don't believe all of it. What I know for certain is that the woman who stood up at my engagement party and stole the room from me was never performing joy at all. She was performing a wedding she never had any right to have, and the only person in that yard who sensed it wasn't real was me.